Thanks for joining us today on Dream Farm. On this episode, we're going to talk about three topics. First one is going to be smoothing out a really rough food plot. Then I'm going to talk about what I'm going to plant in there. And there's a little bit more to that decision than what you might think, because this is that plot that last year the deer wiped it out twice. They wiped it out when it was beans, and then they wiped it out when it was brassicas. So figuring out what to plant in a plot that seems to get a lot of deer damage, that's a bit of a challenge. So we'll tackle that, and then we're also going to, we got our soil tests back from Whitetail Institute, and we're going to take a look at those and talk about what those mean. Dream Farm is brought to you by Whitetail Institute Food Plot Blends, the Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail app, and Hoyt Archery. This food plot on top of this ridge, it's in a great spot. There's bedding all around it, and it's really secluded. So the deer are going to be using this spot anytime during the day, and that's a plus and a minus. It's great from a hunting standpoint, but it makes it kind of tough to grow something there because it's so easy for the deer to pop out there anytime and feed. But before we get into what I'm going to plant in this plot, I want to show you what it looked like last year, how rough it was. This was a cow pasture. It had never been cropped in the knowledge of any of the locals that I've talked to. So when I planted beans in there last year and sprayed it with glyphosate, all of a sudden it exposed all of these humps and bumps and dips and low spots. And it's really hard to plant a field that's that unlevel, because when the planter is going over it, some of the seeds are going really deep because the planter is riding on high spots. In some places the seed is dribbling out on top of the ground. So it just doesn't work. So you got to smooth it out. And it's kind of a trick with limited equipment to smooth out a field. I mean, it's ideal, I guess, if you had some kind of a field cultivator where you could drag the dirt along and fill in holes. But all I've got is this disc, about a 10 or 12 foot disc. So I decided that the trick is to run it really deep, make 2 passes, running it at maximum depth. So the wheels are out of the ground or off the ground. So the entire weight of the disc is riding, on the openers or the cutters, the blades. And that turns over a lot of dirt and creates maybe 6 to 8 inches of loose topsoil. And then I came back over it and ran it shallow. So now I had the wheels touching, and I was feathering up the disc so that it was only running about maybe 3 inches deep. So by having all that loose dirt to work with, then I could just take the stuff off the top and throw it and spread it around by running shallow. And for the most part I got it smoothed out, but it took me quite a while on just about a 3-acre plot to get that leveled up. But it's something to think about if you've got spots like this that are really rough. You can do it with limited equipment. You just have to take a few extra passes. I had 4 total passes, and 2 deep and 2 shallow passes, and that leveled it out pretty good. So now let's talk about what I'm going to plant in here. And as I mentioned, this is a spot that really took a heavy hit from the deer pressure last summer. In fact, I don't know past September if there was even anything left in here that would attract deer. And being as good of a spot as it is with all the bedding areas around it, it would be nice if there was something in there during the hunting season. The trade-off is beans didn't work. I mean, the deer ate the beans just as soon as they popped out of the ground. I'm sure the turkeys were working on them too. So beans are not an option. Well, you remember when we went up in there when we were checking the trail cameras, how much of the damage we saw. Mm-hmm. Each time we went there, there'd be less and less left. Mm-hmm. That was in September. Mm-hmm. So beans won't work. Brassicas would probably work if the whole field was planted to those. I want to try to get a grain in there. And now we're looking at, since it's not beans, it's the question of corn. Will corn work in an area that gets that much attention from the deer? In my experience, it won't. Not well. Maybe here it would, because these deer aren't quite used to eating the ears off the plants, off the corn stalk when the corn is starting to trying to pollinate. So if you get if you get the little silk ears, where you've got small ears with the silk coming out of them, they must be really palatable. I think they're sweet. They're probably really, high sugar content. The deer will just walk through there and eat those off. And you'll come back later and you'll look at your stand and you'll say, looks pretty good. There's a lot of corn here. But then when you start looking at it closer, you'll see there's a lot of corn stalks, and a lot of them don't have ears on them. So that's the risk you have if you plant corn in areas where the deer are really hitting it during the summer. The other option is sorghum, and I've had good luck with sorghum over the years. There's a couple trade-offs there. The upside, the deer won't touch it during the summer. They won't eat any part of that plant when it's green. So it's going to make it, and it's going to go through and make a head. The downside is, once the deer get used to the sorghum, they start really hitting it when the seed gets into what they call the dough stage, or kind of the soft stage, where you can, each individual seed is starting to fill in the seed head, and then they're soft and kind of spongy. And again, it must be more palatable, tastier, and the deer really hammer it during that time. And that's usually not during the season. That's usually in September. Because if you plant at the right time and you got the right maturity, you got to be ahead of the frost. So you want the seed head filling before the first frost, which in our area the first frost is usually sometime in September. So this would not be something we could plant late and then hope to take advantage of that in October, because then we wouldn't get any. We would run the risk of getting an early frost, excuse me, and not having anything. So they probably won't do that year one, maybe not even year two. So I think you can get away with sorghum for a few years until the deer figure out that the tastiest time to eat it is when that seed is in the dough stage. And even on that farm in southern Iowa where we had quite a lot of deer density, and we actually had to put electric fence around our corn in order to keep the corn growing during the summer, even beans. I mean, if you had a small plot, an acre or less, you had to fence it or the deer would completely mow it down. The sorghum did fine. But again, give it 2 or 3 years, they might have figured it out. The deer do like to eat sorghum during the fall and winter. It's not their preferred grain. They would rather eat beans or corn, in my experience. Number one preference if it's cold is corn. And I'd say beans are second, and then sorghum would be down the line.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Say you plant sorghum and the deer catch on to it and they start eating it in the doughy stage. If you cycled back to like corn or beans for a few years and then went back to sorghum, would they still remember that, or would you be able to get away with it again?
I don't know. That's a good question. My fear is that you wouldn't ever get away with it again.
Yeah.
Because it would be built into the generations. You'd have adult does that would bring their fawns to it, and adult bucks that are 3-4 years old.
So you'd almost have to go like 5 or 6 years, or
yeah, it'd be
however long.
You'd almost be better off just trying to kill them all and start over with new deer.
Yeah. One option, I guess.
But that is always a risk with any kind of food plot that you plant in an isolated area where the deer can feed on it any time during the day. They're totally comfortable coming out at noon and eating. So eventually all the deer are just swarming around those spots. We can look at it too from the standpoint of the density. I mean, there might just be too many deer in that area. The trail cameras that we ran there got lots and lots of pictures, way more than other parts of the farm.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe what we do is we just focus a lot of our attention up there this fall, try to shoot several does from that area, and maybe try to thin that specific spot. Mm-hmm. But we're gonna have more food spread around the farm too, so that should help. They won't be quite as concentrated there. So figuring out what to plant is never so simple as just saying, I want this or I want that. You also got to factor in, the dynamic of the deer damage and deer pressure during the summer. So hopefully you picked up a little bit from that. The other thing that I've always fallen back on, if I do plant beans and the deer hammer the beans during the summer, I can always put brassica in there. And now we're working with Whitetail Institutes. That would be something like their winter greens mix. You can just take a no-till drill or even a tillage drill and run some of the brassicas into the ground during the late summer in those spots where the deer have wiped out the beans. So you can always rescue a bean plot, if you plant it and it doesn't work. But I would rather have something that flourishes rather than something that I have to rescue. So anyway, that's what we're looking at, trying to figure out the trade-off of what to do with this field on top. But one thing that we're going to do though is we're going to plant about a ½ acre of the Whitetail Institute Imperial Whitetail Clover right down the middle of the field. I'm going to be planting the Whitetail Institute Imperial Whitetail Clover in this strip behind me. This is about a 3½ acre food plot, and I want to have a trail down the middle of it. It's going to be either corn or sorghum. I've got to figure that part out yet, but I know there's going to be a trail down the middle. So the best thing to put in there is going to be clover, because then, you know, it'll bring the deer to the middle of the plot. It'll be something for the deer to eat during the summer up here on this ridge. It'll be a perfect, the perfect planting for this area. And I've been using this whitetail clover since, gosh, the early 90s when I first started planting this. And it's a white clover blend. And in my experience, the deer really love that. I had really good success with this, and it's adapted well to a variety of locations, whether it's, you know, up on a ridge or down in a lower spot. So you should get some of the varieties that are in this blend to germinate and grow almost no matter where you plant it. So I'm going to get this spread. I'm broadcasting it, so when you do that, you always got to be a little bit careful that you don't open the planter too much when you're going. You know, you want that to be a conservative start, and then you can always open it as you go if it looks like you're not getting enough out. But you don't want to throw a whole bunch of seed out at first, then you know, overseeding isn't a good idea. So let's get this going. It calls for 8 pounds to the acre. I'll probably be planting roughly an acre, and I can get this out and hopefully get it at about the right rate. Okay, Jordan, get in here so I can see you better. So we're going to find out exactly how big an area that I just planted. Jordan has this Garmin watch that she got, and it has a GPS accuracy to what interval?
100th of a mile.
100th of a mile. So I had the thought, well, she could ride on the four-wheeler while the watch was showing the distance, but she had the better idea of she could run from here to the other end with the watch on. I'm
in really good shoes. These are my running shoes.
Normal marathon
Asics
equipment. And so this is her, she thinks it's her moment to shine. We're going to find out exactly how far that is. I threw about a 30-foot, maybe a little bit less than a 30-foot, 25-foot swath with the bag spreader. So I think an acre is 42,400 square feet, maybe something like that. So if we know exactly how far it is in feet, multiply that by 24 feet, and then, you know, take that as a fraction of 42,000 whatever, that'll tell us what fraction of an acre we planted. I'm guessing it was about a ½ an acre. We put down about a half an acre's worth of seed. So this is Jordan's moment. I'm going to see if I can keep up with her on the four-wheeler.
Yeah.
I'm going to call it 0.16.
Okay.
0.16? Yeah, 0.16. That's my call. All right, ready, go.
You were right. 0.16.
0.16? Huh? I nailed it. So it's right about, so we planted almost exactly a ½ an acre. Here, an eagle. There's an eagle nest on this farm, an active one.
Yeah, it's on the point.
Yeah, right over here. When I was in there, we'll look at it on the way down, but when I was in here yesterday doing the disking, when I came out towards evening, the eagle was landing in the nest. You can hear the guys working on the goat prairie. That's what that chainsaw noise is that people hear in the background. So they've got to be pretty close to done. I'll be excited to see what that looks like. It'll look a lot different than that hillside of cedars. Yeah.
You can see the contrast on the neighbor's line versus ours. It's like solid cedars, and then you can see the prairie starting to take shape.
Yeah, and then when they burn that, then that will rejuvenate whatever else was in there to jump in there and fill it in.
It looks a lot different. It looks a lot better.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, let's go back down the hill and finish our episode. So let's talk about the soil tests now. We got those back. Interestingly enough, I did on 3 plots. This is the one in the valley by the scrape tree. It was a 7.5 pH, so it's basic instead of acidic, which is, I don't think that's really all that common. It has, they have another number on here called CEC, and the higher the CEC is, the more lime you have to add to it in order to bring the pH up. But on the Whitetail Institute soil test, CEC is kind of a scale number of how well the soil moderates. So a high CEC means it moderates more slowly. This one, of course, we don't care about putting lime in, and we're not going to try to bring the pH down.
Question.
Yeah.
When we were doing the soil test in the valley, we stopped a couple times to comment on how black the dirt was and how good it looked on a few different locations. Is there a correlation between like the darker the dirt and the higher the pH or anything like that, or is it just because I know dark dirt is better for, it's more fertile, right, or more nutrients or something like that?
Yeah, it might be for soil scientists that really know this kind of stuff. I think I don't know the answer to that. I do know that, excuse me, I do know that it affects that CEC number because the more porous it is, the easier it is to adjust the pH with lime.
Whereas if it was like clay, like Southern Iowa had a lot of clay, it's probably harder to adjust that if you needed to.
Yep, you have to add, you would have to add a lot more lime in order to make that adjustment. So that that valley field had a low CEC, which does represent that feeling that, you know, the moisture moves through it fairly quickly. It would moderate really easily, you know, if you put lime on it. But it doesn't give you nitrogen, because they figure no matter what, the nitrogen is out of the soil. You're gonna have to add nitrogen if you're planting something that wants it. So the phosphorus and the potassium were between adequate and medium. It just shows you where you're at. And then if you look further down, it shows you what you have to add depending upon what you're growing. And the 2 things that I asked them to show me were the imperial clover and the winter greens. So it shows, you know, what you would have to add per acre to get the optimum blend of those, or the optimum growth of those. Okay, so I went into the apartment and I grabbed the other one. So this is up on the ridge, and you can see the actual soil pH is 6.5. The CEC is a little bit higher, so it takes a little bit more to raise the pH. And if you look all the way down at the bottom, and it shows depending on what you're going to plant. Like the imperial clover, it says 1,250 pounds per acre of lime in order to mediate that if you're planting clover.
And we did an experiment, and so we knew that the length of it was 0.16 mile.
Yep.
So that was just over, probably around 300 meters, so 330 yards.
Yeah.
By a 25-foot radius, you said?
Yeah.
So 330 times 25.
So that's 330 yards, so it's like 1,000. So it'd be 25,000 square feet.
Yeah.
So it'd be just over half an acre.
Yeah.
So an acre is 42 something thousand.
So therefore, we would need 625 pounds of lime if we wanted to raise the pH on that strip that we just did.
Right, and we'll use pelletized lime.
Yeah.
Because we can run it in there with the UTV or the 4-wheeler with that spreader. So that's going to be the ticket, and it calls for the clover piece that we planted. Apparently there was enough. Yeah, look at the potassium was off the charts. It was very high. The phosphorus was medium to low. Calcium was decent. Manganese was very high. So we're good on soil quality. We just need some phosphate, you know, which was the P. 60 units of P. They call for 15 of N. I'm not sure why. There must be a reason why that I'm not aware of on clover. I always figured you didn't have to put any nitrogen down. And then the potash, the K, potassium, is plenty high enough. So we don't have a whole lot to do on that strip to make it grow better. We got to lime it. We got to put some P down, a little bit of N, and that's easy to buy. almost any farm co-op, if you took this in and said, here's what I need, they would load the back of your truck up, you know, with the pelletized lime and then the fertilizer that you need. And you just need a way to spread it. And like I said, I've got a spreader that goes on the UTV, the ATV. So we're set. I think we're good. By the next episode, I'm going to talk about what I decide to plant on the outside edges of that top field. Again, we're dealing with the deer damage, and I'll probably end up with sorghum, is my guess. I've had good luck with it in the past. It doesn't make any sense to plant anything else right now. But well, we appreciate you joining us. We will see you right back here again next week for the next episode of Dream Farm, and
remember to always dream big.